let's talk a little bit about Gods and Generals now, because obviously you had to go backwards to sort of go forwards. Obviously, you explained obviously that long journey to get to the point where you made Gettysburg itself. What made you want to revisit and look at the novel of Gods and Generals and turn that into a movie, and eventually get Robert Duvall as well, which was fantastic.
Well, about Gettysburg hadn't even opened yet. It was sometime the fall of '93. And Ted Turner offered me another Civil War movie, Andersonville, based on the McKinley Cantor book.
Oh wow, yeah.
And I thought at that point, uh, I'm done with the Civil War. I just spent 15 years of my life trying to make this movie and, you know, spent all my time in this world of reenactors and Civil War historians. And, it's a whole subculture. Yeah. And I thought, I've said all I have to say. I've done, and I have other movies I want to make. And I said, Ted, I'm flattered. Thank you. But no, thanks. He said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, and without even thinking, I said, I want to do a film on Joan of Arc. And he said, okay, we'll put it in development. And as soon as we were done with the release of Gettysburg was November '93. So the beginning of '94, I got to work on Joan of Arc, which I developed under the auspices of the Turner Company. No intention of doing anything else in the Civil War. In fact, Andersonville was made by, it was made and it aired as a movie for TNT, aired like a year later. Uh, I'm blanking out on the director, but I shouldn't blank out, but it was a terrific director who did it. Who directed the movie The Train, which is another great movie. And the original Manchurian Candidate, that director, he did it. Anyway, then the summer of '94 came along, and I spoke about that earlier, Darren, when we had the TNT release, and that became the most watched miniseries ever. And another thing happened between the release film in November and that summer. I started to get a lot of mail. Now, this is long before email, so this is mail, people writing things. And people didn't have my address. I was living I was bi-coastal in those days, New York and LA. But they'd write to the Directors Guild of America, or they'd write to the Motion Picture Academy. I was a member. Or they'd write to Turner, or they'd write one way or another. This mail started coming to me, but dozens and dozens of letters of people who said their lives had been changed by the movie. Just stunned by this long handwritten letters. And then when the show aired, I realized there was this huge audience, and I heard about the visitation at the park, and it all influenced me in a way that I didn't anticipate. And by this time, I had struck up a friendship with Jeff Shara. Now, I didn't meet Jeff Shara until after his father died. His father, whom he and I were great friends, Michael Shara and I had this friendship from '78 when I met him through '88, the year he died. But in all those years, I didn't know he had a living son. I was told his son had deceased. I was told this not just by Michael, but by his wife, Lila, and by his daughter, his wife, Helen, and his daughter, Lila. I'd spent a lot of time with Michael. So, you don't question these things. And then in '88, after Michael died, I was invited by Helen, his widow, and his daughter, whom I knew, Lila, because they wanted to know where I was with the Killer Angels. Where was I in the project? They were reviewing his books and the estate. And I went to the meeting in New York and saw Helen and saw Lila, and I was introduced to this young fellow who I thought maybe was Lila's boyfriend. I didn't know who he was, and I was introduced. It was Jeff Shara, Michael's son. Well, you could have knocked me over with a feather. And all I can say is there's another story, old as time, the estrangement between fathers and sons. This is an oft-told tale, and it wasn't for me to investigate, but there he was. So Jeff and I started a relationship at that point because we had to talk about the project. So when the Killer Angels was in production, I invited the whole family, Helen, Lila, and Jeff, to the set. He came to the set. I think Jeff stayed a couple of days, 2 or 3 days. He was thrilled to see his father's work come alive. And then nearly 2 years later, well, a year and a half later, when the movie was about to be released, and the DVD, the CD of the soundtrack was available, which you talked about before, Darren. I heard the story from Jeff. Jeff told me that he took a boombox with a CD of the score to his father's grave and played the entire score of the film. So they had that posthumous reconciliation. Well, that was November, December, January, from 93 to 94. And I say that summer, when I realized that Gettysburg had entered the consciousness of the country. It was not just another movie. And I got in touch with Jeff and I said, Jeff, I think this film has struck a chord, and I think it deserves a prequel and a sequel. Now, I guess in retrospect, I could have just myself as a filmmaker wrote a screenplay as a prequel and wrote a screenplay as a sequel. It didn't need to have more novels. But the way I thought about it in those days was we should have a prequel novel and a sequel novel to Gettysburg, to the Killer Angels, because there's an audience for this, obviously. The audience that Ted Turner knew would be there. Jeff thought it was an intriguing idea, and then we thought, well, who could we get to write this? And so I said, Jeff, because remember, Jeff and his sister and mother owned the rights to the Shara estate. So we thought about it, and I had this idea because one of the letters I got after I got back home from filming when I was in post-production, late 92, so a year before the film was released, was from Jeff Shara. Jeff Shara wrote me this long handwritten letter about his experience of visiting the set and how much it meant to him. And I knew what he was talking about because I knew by then that he had spent at least the previous decade from 78 when I met his father, 78 to 88, being estranged from his father. So I knew how meaningful this was for him. And the letter was just written with great poignancy. So I said, Jeff, I only have one thing to base this on. It's a letter you wrote me, but would you consider writing the novel? And in that case, you could have knocked him over with a feather because he never crossed his mind. He's not a writer. He was a coin dealer, a dealer in rare coins, and he was a building contractor, building houses. But he said, well, let me think about it. So we both thought about it. And Ted Turner was not in the equation yet. I didn't have any conversations with Ted Turner about this. I was still getting supported from the Turner Organization to do research on Joan of Arc, and I was in the middle of actually writing a screenplay, an original screenplay based on the research on Joan of Arc. Well, finally, Jeff and I had a conversation, and I said, look, Jeff, why don't you try it? And then if it doesn't work out, no one will know but you and me. And so we said, let's go for it. So then we had discussions. We said, it should be the same characters from Gettysburg, And I suggested, let's start them in the Mexican War, because most of them, that's where their friendships were made. And so we agreed, and he went back and he started doing research. And after a month or so, I don't remember exactly, he came back and he said, Ron, I've been doing the research and I think we need to add another character. And I said, who's that? And he said, Stonewall Jackson. I said, well, Jeff, I think we should stay with the characters. If it was a true prequel, it should be the characters we had in Gettysburg and start them in the Mexican War. That's who was there, with Longstreet and Lee and Pickett. They were all there. And then take them through the Mexican. And then we went back and forth, and he was reading all this stuff, and he got more enthused about Stonewall Jackson. And I finally he won me over. And he said, I think the first 2 years of the war, as we know, Jackson dominates. So
Mhm.
he won me over. So it would be the other characters from before plus Jackson. Now, what I didn't consider at the time, and it only became evident with the passage of time, was that this was going to create a real problem in terms of the movie making. Because Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain doesn't come on the battlefield until 1862, late in 1862. Stonewall Jackson is on the battlefield at the very beginning of 1861. Lee doesn't command the army of the Northern Virginia until late in 1861. So there are things which are going to put it, dramatically speaking, going to be challenging in terms of the passage of time. The great advantage that Gettysburg had, the Killer Angels, was that it's 4 days, the day before the battle and the 3 days of the battle. So there's time and place is condensed in an Aristotelian sense, time and space and characters all together. The movie we were envisioning as a prequel had to span the beginning of the war, 1861, through the Battle of Chancellorsville, which is May 63. That's 2 years, which means you no longer have the unity of time and space. Multiple locations, a lot of time. So I knew in terms of the movie, I was giving myself headaches, but let's proceed. So Jeff started working, and he handed in the first chapters from the Mexican War, and I was impressed. And I said, Jeff, keep going. He writes. I'm getting a chapter at a time. I'm giving him feedback, but he's doing the writing. And the deal we made, which is probably one of the dumbest deals in my life, was he would keep 100% of the literary rights, and we would share the movie rights 50-50. I should have at least argued for 10% of the literary rights, since I was adding to the formation and the shaping of the story. And we also agreed that it would be written like his father did, back and forth. So the way Michael Shara did Longstreet, Hancock, Lee, Buford, that kind of, we would have Jackson, Chamberlain, that kind of back and forth storytelling. So he would kind of mimic his father's literary style. Well, he ends up doing the whole book, and it was big because it was the Mexican War part and the whole thing. And we thought, this is now kind of unwieldy. Why don't we break it into 2 books? Let's cut off the Mexican War part and save it for another movie later, another book later. And so we broke it off, and we just had the part that starts in 1861 through 1863, sealed it up, and we said, let's send it to Ted Turner. And would you believe, now this is like a year later, now this is like 95 now. It took about a year. And Jeff and I send it to Ted Turner. And right away, within a couple of weeks, Jeff is offered $500,000 advance. That's unheard of for a first-time writer. $500,000 advance. And I can assure you that's when I regretted not making a different deal for like at least 10%. And Jeff said, let me try my father's publisher before we make the deal. So he went back to Ballantine, which is his father's publisher, Killer Angels. And they offered him $1 million advance. $1 million advance. So it's Jeff's first book, first-time writer. He got $1 million check. And as we know, the book then went into publication. I think it came out in 96, a year later. and it was an instant bestseller. Now, here's the irony. The Killer Angels didn't become a bestseller until after the movie came out. So even though it had won the Pulitzer Prize in 1975 for fiction, it never made any real money for Michael Shara. But after the movie came out, Killer Angels became a bestseller, which made money, wonderful for the Shara family. And then when Jeff's first book came out, it became a bestseller. So he was launched on his career, which we now know is illustrious.
Yeah, so I had
Career.
no idea that that was the story behind. So yeah, it was so the idea was a movie technically before a book.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So it now I was busy during that time, focused on doing Joan of Arc. As you know, I didn't make
Hmm.
that Joan of Arc, but I was working on it intensely in 94, 95, 96. And somewhere around 97, there was a new regime came in at Turner, and the Turner organization abandoned it. And I asked Ted if he wanted to do it just as Ted Turner Pictures. And he just didn't have the excitement for it that he had for Civil War stories. And so I then got it what's called turnaround, and I tried to work on it until I almost had it set up in '98, and then Luc Besson's movie the Messenger came out, which is the story of Joan of Arc, and it knocked my film right out of contention. I never made it, and then I was back home from France in the fall of '98, and I got a phone call from Ted Turner, and he said, "Ron, I want to do Gods and Generals as a movie. Do you have the rights?" And I said, "Yes, I have the rights. Jeff and I have the rights. Well, let's do it." Uh, and that's how the commitment was made to make it. And we went through a similar journey, a mirror journey that we went through on Gettysburg, because at that time he had a company called TNT. He didn't have Warner Brothers yet. It was '98, and so it was put in development as a miniseries. So we're back to that whole thing. So I got a hold. I told Jeff we got a deal with Ted, and then I went to the book to try to turn it into a screenplay. And then all my original worries, I had to confront them. And adapting that book to the screen was very challenging. As I say, Killer Angels had the unity of time and place and people. So writing the screenplay, which was challenging, it took me a long time, still, it was manageable in terms of the unities. Gods and Generals wasn't. First of all, they had this new character that wasn't in the original movie. And then the way Jeff wrote the book, it was dominant. He is the dominant character in the novel. It's almost like it's Stonewall Jackson's novel. And all the other characters become incidental to him. Even Joshua Chamberlain, who is very much there in the book, is not as prominent as Stonewall Jackson. So my challenge became to adding to the screen time to keep this balance between the Yankees and the Confederates, which was daunting. And I must say I never quite achieved it, to my disappointment. And I wanted to have it the same balance between the Confederates and the Yankees. But given the book I was handed, it became virtually impossible. So that was one problem. The second problem that I confronted with the adaptation was the fact that in Jeff's novel, there's no African Americans, and the time with the women is fleeting. And I thought, how can you do a movie over 2 years of the Civil War? 2 years, not the 4 days of Gettysburg, 2 years, and have no African American characters and almost no civilians, with the exception of Anna Jackson and a glimpse of Myra Hancock. I said, I can't do this. I've got to. This is not the real world. And so I had to bring in characters that are not in the novel. I wanted to bring in civilian characters, but how could I bring them in legitimately that belongs to the story? So the only way to bring in African American characters legitimately who belong to the story, not arbitrarily, was the way I did. So Jackson's aide de camp and personal factotum, general factotum, was Jim Lewis. Jim Lewis is a real character. I didn't make him up. And Jim Lewis, Afro-Virginian, was with Stonewall Jackson every single day from the day he was hired till the day he was died. How could you not have him in the story? Now, some critics after the movie came out, I was attacked with, "Oh, I'm going to show the Black Confederate." I wasn't grinding an axe. I wasn't. I had no agenda. He was there to tell the story of Stonewall Jackson and not have Jim Lewis would be fraudulent. Now, my principal historical advisor on the film was Bud Robertson. Bud Robertson wrote the definitive biography of Stonewall Jackson. There are others, but his is regarded as the definitive biography. At the time, he was still the head of the Civil War Studies Center at Virginia Tech, excuse me. And I asked Bud, well, let me back up. I'm going to save that little aside. So I had to bring in, so that was the African-American character I brought in. Now I had to find civilians. And so one of the big battles in the film, as we know, which is in the book, is the Battle of Fredericksburg. And that's a place, why Fredericksburg? Because at Fredericksburg, Chamberlain is there, Hancock is there, Lee is there, Longstreet is there, Pickett is there, Stonewall Jackson is there. They're all there. So just like the Battle of Gettysburg, the Battle of Fredericksburg, all our characters are there in the one place. So you have, for a brief moment in time, we reunify time and place. The unities are all there. So it's almost like a movie within a movie. And when I did the research, I found Jane Beale's diaries. Jane Beale, like the Chestnut Diaries, Jane Beale was living in Fredericksburg and lived through the whole siege, the whole bombardment, the whole battle, and writes about it every day. So I made her the principal civilian character, so we're seeing the devastation of the battle in an urban environment through her eyes. And that's how I brought the civilian element to the story. Again, she's not in the novel. Now, she had a couple of sons, both who leave for the war at the beginning. And she was also friends with Roberta Corbin. Roberta Corbin is a character in the book. Roberta Corbin is the mother of Jane Corbin, the little girl befriended by Jackson after the Battle of Fredericksburg during the winter camp. That's all in the book. But Roberta Corbin was friends with Jane Corbin. And so, excuse me, she's Jane Corbin's mother, friends with Jane Beale. So I made Roberta Corbin more of a character, and I introduced her with Jane Beale at the beginning, long before the Battle of Fredericksburg. So we're introduced to them at the beginning of the war when her sons volunteered to go into the Confederate Army. So this is my way of introducing and also this is how the other African-American character came in, because there was a domestic enslaved person, Martha, who lived in the Beale household, who had two children of her own, and they're in the movie. So the two African-Americans, one is a free man of color and the other one is an enslaved person, are both with white families. And for that reason, this filmmaker was excoriated because the African-Americans in the film are not being abused by Confederate characters. Well, that went on. Movies about it must be made. Maybe someday, if I live long enough, I'll be one of the filmmakers to show that. We know those horrible situations occurred. They did occur. We've had recent movies about it, like 7 Years a Slave. I think that's the title. Outstanding movie. Those stories must be told, but this wasn't the story of Stonewall Jackson. This wasn't the story of the characters that I was given in Jeff Sharra's book. I had to stay with the characters I was given. And these people, Martha was played by Donzelle Abernathy, who's the daughter of the great Ralph Abernathy, the civil rights leader who marched with Martin Luther King. Donzelle Abernathy was at the bombing in Selma. She had her girlfriends of hers were murdered. She lived through the worst aspects of those days. She's an extraordinary actress. She plays Martha. And when we did our interviews for Black Entertainment Television before the release of the movie, She said, I'm proud of my ancestors, especially the enslaved people. How did they endure? How did they survive? And she said, what was I supposed to do when the Yankees came into Fredericksburg? Run away with my kids? Where am I going to run to? I'm in a house. I have a roof over my head. I can feed my kids. So she embodied this African American woman who had no illusions about wanting to be free. And I think some of the critics, what they missed in Gods and Generals is to see an enslaved person in a domestic setting with kind white people doesn't make slavery any less evil. Who among us wants to be owned by another human being? It was an evil institution, reprehensible. Thank God we had abolition. Thank God we had emancipation. But this is missed by some of the critics because they don't see a black woman being raped or being flogged. It didn't have to be that bad. It was bad. In its best incarnation, it was bad. And this is the African American person we see in the Beale family. Again, I had to stay with the characters. I had to stay with the characters who could tell the story. But getting back to Jim Lewis, so I went to Bud Robertson, and it's not settled. Was Jim Lewis borrowed as an enslaved person by Stonewall Jackson, or was he a free man of color who was hired? Now, Bud Robertson said, there's no way to know this conclusively, or we couldn't know it, at least when we made the movie. Maybe there's been more evidence since, because there's always new evidence. But Bud Robertson came down firmly on the side, play him as a free man of color who was hired by Jackson. And that's what we did in the script, and that's how he was played. Now, the story I kind of glossed over was when I had my first screenplay, which took me a while to get because I was wrestling with the imbalance. I sent it. Mort Kunstler was a friend, the great Civil War artist. And I sent it to him, and he really enjoyed reading the screenplay. And he said, would you like me to get it to Robertson? And I said, oh my goodness, I'm opening myself up for a flaying. I said, okay. He sent it to Bud Robertson, and I got a word back about a week later. Bud wants to see you. I thought, uh-oh. And Mort and Bud and I met at an eatery in Fredericksburg. Bud came up from Blacksburg, and Mort came down from New York, and I forget where I was at the time. And we sat down, and I was bracing myself for the onslaught from this great Civil War historian, the biographer of Stonewall Jackson. And he said to me, Mr. Maxwell, I never thought I would live to see the day when Hollywood would make an honest film about Stonewall Jackson. After that endorsement, which put me at my ease, he then provided giving me a lot of notes. And soon thereafter, we took him on as the principal, not the only advisor, but the principal advisor on the film. And he actually visited the set on more than one occasion. So I've taken a long-winded way to answer your question, Darren, but the screenplay was really daunting. And it had this imbalance in it from the get-go because the first third of the screenplay, I couldn't bring Joshua Chamberlain in 6 months or 9 months before he entered the war. You can't do that. You can't change history that radically. So I couldn't bring him in until after the Battle of First Manassas. Well, you're 1 hour into the movie at that point. And so right away, the film did not have the balance that Gettysburg had. It couldn't, unless I was going to take great liberties with the chronology. Now, once Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain comes into the war, it's just after the Battle of First Manassas, then we were able to achieve some sense of balance. But then a second thing happened. We filmed everything. We filmed the whole thing happened. And then the same exact thing happened in terms of its release as happened with Gettysburg. We were like, and in this case, it was before we started filming. We were like a week or two before we started filming. not a week after we started filming, like what happened in Gettysburg. And the word came from Ted Turner. He wants to release it as a movie, not as a miniseries. Well, that was quite wonderful. Maybe it was, I'm sorry, let me correct that. It was a couple of months before filming. It was a couple of months before, not a couple of weeks. Well, that was great because then we knew we were going to shoot it widescreen, 2:3:5 aspect ratio, CinemaScope. And we designed the shots that way, designed the whole movie there. But we were still shooting this humongous script, this 5-hour script. So we thought, we're either going to have a big, long movie, like with Gettysburg, with an intermission, or we're going to have 2 movies. But anyway, we shot everything. Now, another thing I put in the screenplay that was not in the book was this Greek chorus. I mean, when I say Greek chorus, I'm referring to the subplot with John Wilkes Booth. And in the subplot with John Wilkes Booth, which starts right at the beginning of the film and it goes right to the very end of the film, I've enabled William Shakespeare to comment on the American Civil War. So this gets back to what I talked about earlier, Darren. The film lives in the 1860s, but it also lives in a universal, timeless place. And in the universal, timeless place, William Shakespeare has a lot to say about fratricide and about regicide, both. So when we did the research, and I found that John Wilkes Booth played in this theater on this day, and this theater on this day, and this theater on this day, Baltimore, Chicago, Washington, and he played Brutus on this day, and he played Macbeth on this day, and played Hamlet on this day. I was able to reconstruct on the exact days he played those roles, his performance with William Shakespeare commenting on the American Civil War. So that on the very day of the Battle of Antietam, the biggest single casualty day of the Civil War, 20,000 people died, 20,000 casualties. On the same moment, John Wilkes Booth is on the stage in Chicago playing Hamlet, and he says, "But for a trick of fame, 20,000 go to their dead. Around the numbers cannot try the cause, which is not tomb enough and continent to try the slain." I've butchered the quote, but you know the one I mean.
Mm-hmm.
No, you can't make this stuff up. It's not made up. So William Shakespeare, Hamlet, comments on what happens literally on the bloody battlefield of Antietam the day it happens. Yeah. So I use his performances as a Greek chorus, commenting on what we're seeing. And along the way, you see the radicalization of John Wilkes Booth, who starts to see himself as a regicide. Now, thank God, most actors who play those roles don't go out and commit political murder. But as we know, he did. So these things became new additions that were not in the book, but it was an attempt to create a new cinematic experience. And then the battles are the same as in the book. So first Manassas, but none of our Yankee characters were there, which created an imbalance. And then Antietam, and then Fredericksburg, and then Chancellorsville. And the only battle where everybody is there, as I said earlier, all the characters are there, is Fredericksburg. Mm-hmm. So Fredericksburg, it almost works as a movie within a movie.
Yeah, it does. I love those scenes because for me, Fredericksburg has an important spot in my life, and I'm part of an organisation called Emerging Civil War, which is based in Fredericksburg. All those guys are down there. A good friend of mine that gave me my first podcast interview, Chris Bukowski, lives on the Chancellorsville battlefield, believe it or not. And so I have a special connection with Fredericksburg. And the battle scenes for Fredericksburg are fantastic.
Well, there's another. Is my signal okay? Am I breaking up?
Yeah, you're fine. No, absolutely fine.
Another one of those places where I say that the film lives in there's a duality moving forward all at the same time. So when the Chamberlain and the 20th Maine are mustered and they're in the Stafford Heights, overlooking. They're on the heights
Hmm.
overlooking the Rappahannock River and Fredericksburg. And in the distance, the far distance, is the sunken road and the stone wall, way the far distance, the Confederates. But he can see everything. When they're being mustered, I have him reciting Lucanus.
Hmm.
Again, this is not in the novel. Why is he reciting Lucanus? And remember, this is an act of the imagination, but let's step back. All of filmmaking is an act of the imagination. Everything, even the film The Battle of My Gettysburg, is an act of the imagination. We didn't know exactly what Lee said or Longstreet said, or I mean, we have a few quotes, like we know because an aide wrote it down that Hancock said there are times when a commander's life does not count. Yeah, because somebody wrote that down 15 minutes later that he really said that. Or in Gods and Generals, one of the aides, probably John Easton Cook, one of the aides who was around Robert E. Lee, the next day wrote, Robert E. Lee after the battle said, "It is well that war is so terrible, or we should grow too fond of it." So yes, we have a few moments when this person said exactly that. But most of it is made up either by Michael Shara or by Jeff Shara or by Ron Maxwell. And we hope that in the making of it up, it belongs to the characters. It's believable. It is authentic to them. So we know that Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain was a professor of rhetoric and religion. We know that he was well read and he knew Latin. So could he have read Lucanus in the original Latin? Yes. Did he for sure read Lucanus in the original? We don't know. So I'm taking a wild guess, but it's based on who he is. You couldn't give that to somebody who was never a professor, who never read Latin. It would be ludicrous. But to put it in his mouth, you can accept it.
Yeah.
And why does he say Lucanus at that? But why does he quote Lucanus? Because the quote from Lucanus is about Caesar crossing the boundaries of Rome, which, as we know, no general was supposed to take the legions into Rome. That was a major no-no. He did it, and as we know, it ended up starting the Civil War. So, in the act of Caesar crossing that river against the dictates of Rome with an army, Chamberlain could look down and see his army, the Union Army, sent by Abraham Lincoln, crossing a different river 2,000 years later in a different kind of violation. Because, in fact, Abraham Lincoln in 1861 sent federal troops into Virginia, which was, in a certain sense, and certainly in the sense of the eyes of the states of the Confederacy, in their eyes, a violation of the understanding of the Constitution. Now, it was argued then, it's been argued since, and it'll be argued forever. Was secession legal? Was it constitutional? Could any president send an army to suppress a state? There's no end to these debates. But anyway, in that moment, I thought it was appropriate for Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain to see this connection. So in that moment, it's another one of these moments in the film, and both films have it, where you're living in two dimensions: the dimension of the present moment in 1863, in this case in 1862, or in this timeless dimension that transcends time and place. Uh, Realizing that moment that what he's seeing before his eyes, we've been there before, albeit 2,000 years before.
Hmm. And I know you said there was sort of like you felt like there was a slight imbalance, but I liked the way you put it together. And again, going from, Jackson's stuff to training his army, I loved all that stuff of the build up towards that first engagement at Manassas. But I also love the fact that you took the time to put those bits in there when they first get mustered in Maine and they form the regiment. I thought it was fantastically put together. And like you said, the adding those little bits in with the Chamberlain speech, it really added an extra layer for me to the story. And like you said, I mean, you even mention it in the film as well. The fact that I think one of the Confederate guys mentions that, Fredericksburg was actually quite an important city because George Washington's mother lived there. George Washington frequented around that area. So again, symbolically, it was quite an important place, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and it's there's a scene there with Lee where again, it's one of the scenes that's not in the book where Lee comments on that. When he looks down, he comments on the fact that that's where Washington was reputed to have thrown
Hmm.
over the river and cut down the cherry tree. I mean, this is all folklore, but it's a folklore that was alive in the middle of the 19th century, the same way it's alive with us now.
Yeah.
Um, so it was a challenge, and if what made things more difficult, Darren, is when we got to a point where I had this 5 hour cut, and Turner saw it a number of times. We were in post production in L.A., but I would fly to Los Angeles with the editor, and we'd show it to Ted Turner in a screening room. He'd have comments on it. We'd fly back with him, show it to the executives. Everybody had seen the dailies. They were thrilled with the dailies. Everybody had seen the work in progress. And we got to a point where we said, look, we either have two movies of 2.5 hours each or one movie, but if it's one movie, we've got to cut it way down. It can't be 5 hours. So it's got to be like 3.5 hours plus an intermission. Well, to cut it down to 3.5 hours, which we did, we were trying all these things out. We were spending a lot of time actually trying to do these cuts. It became the film of Stonewall Jackson, essentially, and everybody else becomes an incidental character. And Darren, I have nobody to share the responsibility with but me, because it finally came down to this. The studio said we can release two movies over 2 years. So the first movie would end at the Battle of Fredericksburg, and the second movie would start in the winter camp. Or one movie, but then we knew what the one movie would be. The one movie, all the training with the Yankees was gone. The scene you just said you liked so much. The subplot with John Wilkes Booth is gone. The whole sequence with the Battle of Antietam gone. All sorts of the camp life on the Confederates with all sorts of stuff out. And they said, it's up to you, Ron. It's up to you. Can you imagine? It's up to me. Now, Darren, looking back on it, as I say, nobody to blame but myself. It was the worst business mistake I've made in my life, and I've made some doozies. But this was a huge mistake. And I had reasons. Had I agreed to two movies, from a personal point of view, both movies would have been 2.5 hours, 2 hours and 20 minutes. In other words, they would have been in the envelope of major film releases. No intermission required, multiple screenings every day. Nobody would have thought it's too long. And we would have had two shots at the box office. Number one. Number two, personally, I was the producer, the director, and the writer. All three fees would have been doubled. All three fees doubled. So if I had a brain in my head and just thinking about myself, it was a no-brainer. Two movies over 2 years. But the other argument was the Homeric arc. If the story, the central character is still Stonewall Jackson, and it was, whether it's 5 hours or whether it's 3.5 hours, if the central character is Stonewall Jackson, then you needed to see the Homeric arc all at once. Otherwise, you couldn't have hubris leading to catharsis. And I don't mean to be, again, literal about all this, but in terms of the feelings and the shape, hubris leading to catharsis. The hubris is he goes beyond his lines, way beyond his lines in the middle of the night. And the catharsis is his death. And symbolically, metaphorically, the death of the Confederacy, because after his death, it's all downhill for the Confederacy. Mm-hmm. You could say they lost the war when he died. If you wanted to feel all that, the unity of that character, you need to see it all at once. And there's another reason which haunted me, very important. Again, because of the inherent imbalance that I was given with the book. If you don't hear why the Yankees are fighting until well after the Battle of Fredericksburg. I had to write a scene that doesn't even exist in the book. The scene between Tom and his brother, the two Chamberlain brothers, when they're talking about the war aims shifting after the Battle of Antietam. And on January 1st, 1863, the day of Jubilee, which was celebrated for many, many decades afterwards, when the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect, the war aims changed. It was no longer just to suppress the rebellion to save the United States. It was also for the emancipation of the enslaved people. So January 1st, 1863, the war aims changed. They became added. And that is articulated in the scene I wrote, it's not in the book, between the two Chamberlain brothers. When Tom Chamberlain is told by Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, yes, a war is a scourge with slavery. And he articulates the added way to fight, the reason to fight the war. It's very important. Now, if you couldn't get to that till the second movie, you'd go through the whole first movie and you wouldn't have articulated hearing the words spoken by Yankee characters of this new war aim. And I thought, it's just going to be a film about Stonewall Jackson if it's divided in two. You're certainly going to know why the Confederates are fighting, but you're not going to know really why the Yankees are fighting. I said, I couldn't live with that. I couldn't live with that. So I came down on the one shorter movie.
Yeah, and again, though,
now,
it's still great, though. Still,
well, but from my point, the problem with the one shorter movie was then it was really disjointed because it took out a lot of the sinews and the tissues that made things kind of work, and it became disjointed in time and space and out of balance because it made it look like much more the story of the Confederates. It didn't have the balance. So when the movie opened up, of course, it got all sorts of criticism. Some of it was not fair. Some of it was politically correct nonsense, but a lot of it was deserved. And I think what the part that was deserved was the imbalance. It looked like it was mostly telling the Confederate story and not the Yankee story, which is a result of the imbalance. And it's the disjointed jumping around nature. Now, this was restored when we had the director's cut in 2011 to coincide with the 150th sesquicentennial. That's the whole 5 hours we filmed. So that now the balance is restored. This is the movie we set out to make. And when people ask me about it, I always say, please watch the director's cut, because this is the movie we designed. It's the movie we shot. It's the movie we edited. It's the movie we intended from the get-go.
Yeah. So again, how much of a hand did you have in the director's cut versions? Because I have them both. As soon as they came out, I pretty much snapped them up. And the fact that they were also in Blu-ray as well, which was just amazing. You got all that detail, so you was heavily involved in that process, was you?
Yeah, well, once we decided to do it, I'm so glad again that Ted Turner decided to do it. Now, Ted Turner spent at least $1 million because this wasn't just a matter of going to the editing room and dropping in the scenes we cut out. No, because those scenes had been edited out and they needed to be edited back in. So the whole movie had to be re-edited from start to finish. And along the way, having seen the theatrical version in a few screenings, I realized I wanted to go back and make some trims, even that that I do the first time around. So even though there's a lot of new material reintegrated, there's some scenes which are trimmed, shorter, tighter than they were before.
Mhm.
So what it is, it's a whole different animal. And once we took it all apart, that means we had to redo the soundtrack. And because we added whole new scenes, there's a whole new scenes with scoring, with music from John Frizzell that we never heard before, as well as the whole, not just the whole subplot with John Wilkes Booth, which is not in the movie, but the whole Antietam sequence, which is not in the movie, more and much more camp life, not just with the Yankees and, as you say, the mustering in Maine, but also more camp life among Jackson's aides when he gets his jacket given to him by the German visitor. Uh, so it's a richer, fuller, and it's the version of the movie that we wanted to make from the get-go.
Yeah, excellent. I'm
And,
going
and,
to
and I
take
was there to answer your question, Aaron. I was there for the whole process. I moved back to
excellent.
LA. I was in LA for 6 months, refinishing soundtrack, remixing it, recolorizing it. It's a whole new animal.
I just want to bring up a couple of my favorite scenes from Gods and Generals, and there's lots, you know. I mean, it's just such a fantastic movie. You know, I know, and again, I know it's had its critics and whatever, but I don't care. I love this movie, and I think, you know, there's many others that do too. And it's because of that level of detail that you went to try and show both sides of the story. Now, one of my favorite scenes, and for some reason I forgot to get a picture of it, is when they share a moment at Christmas in the river. And I think it's down in Fredericksburg area, isn't it? The Rappahannock, and they swap over tobacco and coffee. And I think you mentioned it a little while ago on social media about that scene. That's a very iconic scene. I love that scene. And then you have that really like sort of lull moment where the guy's sipping the coffee and the other guy's tasting the tobacco. Tell us about your idea between that, but you know, behind that scene.
Well, another thing, that uh, there's obviously a lot that's in the movie, both in the theatrical release and even more so in the director's cut that's not in the book. And uh, it, uh, my friend Jeff Shara has gone on many video complaining about it, and I guess he didn't need to do that publicly, but he has repeatedly because he hasn't been happy. Although the script was given to him when it was in writing, I can't say whether he read it or not. He was invited to the set. He came to the set. He saw the filming and it was going on. There was certainly a lot of screenplays laying around he could have picked up and read. And Well, during post production, we were in constant communication. And he saw the film in previews and he came to all the premieres. He came to all the black tie premieres. We had a number of them. Drank the champagne, did a lot of PR. I did a lot of PR. He did PR promoting the movie. And then only after the movie came out did he say I had nothing to do with it. So that's regrettable. But one of the new characters I added in the movie were these two kind of everyman characters. They're the two Confederate soldiers. We meet them early on when they're forced to march and march and march. And so why were we marching? I thought we needed some everyman characters because Gettysburg only had officers, and Gods and Generals, again, we not only officers, they're all generals, major generals. It's in the title, Gods and Generals. But I thought, again, a 2-year film about the war, we should see some grunts, so to speak. So I introduced these two characters, again, based on a lot of research I've done over the years, of kind of regular privates in the Confederate Army. And we introduced them early as they're being mustered in the Shenandoah Valley. They're still in their civvies. And they serve as a kind of a comic relief, as kind of Falstaff and Bardolph, again from Shakespeare. And they're kind of a running gag. And And so one of those characters is we meet him again on the river Rappahannock. It's Christmas Day. It's December 25th, 1862. And we coming out of the scene, the Christmas celebration at Moss Neck Manor with Robert E. Lee and Roberta Corbin's house with Jane Corbin when Jane Corbin meets Stonewall Jackson by the Christmas tree. Um, and it's right after that scene, and we go to these grunts and these everymen, the Confederate soldiers are in their winter encampment by the Rappahannock River, and that's when we continue hearing the fiddle being played Silent Night. And we assume by the way the scene plays that it's somebody on the Yankee side playing the fiddle, and the Confederate soldier hears it, and he yells over the river to Billy Yank, and Billy Yank answers back to Johnny Reb, and one side has coffee and the other side has tobacco, and they decide to swap, and they both walk out into the shallow Rappahannock, and not a word is said, not a word needs to be said. And in that moment, we see again what I referred to earlier, the specific place, December 26, excuse me, December 25, 82, and the universal. Fratricide and brotherly love embodied in two anonymous soldiers who meet in the middle of the river in the middle of the war.
Mm-hmm. Which tomorrow will be shooting each other and carrying on like another day. But this is the thing. What you captured there is the real essence of what went on, because that did go on at Fredericksburg. Trading went on throughout the Civil War, shouting insults across the river at each other. That went on too, so you really captured that essence. And I love the shot that you capture, especially with the mist coming off the river and everything as well. It really adds that element of just authenticity and atmosphere to that scene. So yeah, wanted to just mention that.
Well, thank you, Darren. It's certainly one of our goals in both movies, and also in Copperhead. Copperhead is not a war movie, but it's 1862 in the middle of the war. Is the sense of total immersion.
Hmm.
So once you enter the theater, or if you see it at home on your large screen TV and the lights are down, and you're entering this universe. And you're quite right that the way you enter this universe is as filmmakers, we have to populate it with details so that everything you see has to belong to the 1860s. Everything you hear has to belong to the 1860s. And everything you feel has to belong to the. Now, what do I mean by feel? The moral, ethical universe these people were living in. That's why to meet these people, I have to do my best to abandon judgment, because if I don't abandon judgment, I'm imposing my judgment on the viewer. Then the viewer has an imposed judgment. Now, it's impossible not to some extent, impose your point of view on things. But I think the job of a filmmaker, at least my job as I see it, is not to impose myself. We all know in the time we live in what's right and wrong about the people in the 1860s. Just like a future generation, maybe not that far from now, but when we're dead and buried, will look back on us and say, what did we do in our time to protect the environment, the planet? I have no doubt that future generations will look back on us living now and say, what the hell were they doing? What were they thinking? Oh, they'll be very judgmental at the world we leave behind, the world we're wrecking as we speak. So it's easy for us to look back in the 1860s and say, we're better than those people. We're ethically and morally superior. We would have made better judgments. Maybe we would have, maybe we wouldn't have. But my job as a filmmaker is to go to where they lived. When I talk about the ethical and moral universe, it's the place they lived in. They didn't know Einstein and the theory of relativity. They didn't know Sigmund Freud. They didn't know any of the stuff that plagues us and informs us and swamps our way of thinking. They were even living in a world extraordinary to us where human beings were enslaved and it was legal. And some people even thought it was biblical. We look at that and it's beyond our comprehension that anybody can function this way and still think of themselves as moral and ethical people. But they did. Not just the slaveholders, even people in the North, as we know. By our standards today, everybody was a racist, except for a handful of abolitionists who believed that the black people and the white people were all children of God, equal in God's eyes. You know, they were in the 1860s where we strive to be today, or we pretend to be today, or we want to be today, or we claim to be today. But to go back to that point, you got to get into that ethical universe. So this is prep with the actors on the cast. It's a matter of erasure. You can't be successful totally, but erasure of all the stuff of the 20th century and the 21st century and get back to their world without judgment. Because if any actor plays it like, I know better, I'm better than these people, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. So all these people have to embody the characters and get into their belief system. Now, we could look at it then. We could look at Gods and Generals. We can look at Gettysburg and find them very strange. We wouldn't have behaved that way. We wouldn't do that. But at the same time, we can believe it. And that's my job as a filmmaker, to make the totality believing, so that you enter into this universe and you say, yeah, I believe that's how it could have been.
Absolutely. I aim to all of that, really, honestly. And as a reenactor, when I come across people, a living historian, I always remind people that, we looking at stuff from a different lens. You can't judge people from, that time period. But I will like to bring this up, Ron, and how satisfying was it for you to go to a Gettysburg 30th anniversary event? I mean, did you ever envision that you would be doing that 30 years on?
I can't say I ever did. I don't know when I started feeling like an elder statesman or, or just an elder person. Uh, I'll leave it to other people to decide whether I deserve the statesman category. But well, thank the good Lord, I'm still walking around, still strong. I can go out and direct a movie tomorrow. I could work a 15-hour day if I had to, and knock on wood. My parents left me some good genes, and I try to take care of myself. But no, it's rather amazing that 32 years after filming, and 32 years now. It's 32 years after the film came out. That photo that we see was from 2 years ago. So now we're 32 years as of now from when the movie was released, and 34 years from when we filmed it. And soon we're coming up on the 25th anniversary in a couple of years of Gods and Generals. So it's rather amazing. And what's really deeply satisfying, because I get the quarterly reports from Warner Brothers, who have both films in video. And yes, DVDs are sold and Blu-rays are sold, but the main viewing of both the movies now is in digital downloads or in streaming. And that's everywhere. So I see, Germany, Peru, Japan. Both movies have found a global audience, and it only gets bigger. It only gets bigger. So it's deeply satisfying to see how these movies are providing a window into the American Civil War.
Well, before we wrap up here, I have one request, and you're going to laugh, but can we please have the last one?
Well,
You're going to swear at me, aren't you, Ron?
as I mentioned earlier, Jeff and I share the rights, the cinematic rights, and I've learned never to say never. It's not on the drawing board. It's not on the plans. And quite frankly, I have more than enough movies I want to make that are in the pipeline. God willing, I live long enough, I get to make at least one more. So it's not on my horizon, but you never can tell. And if tomorrow I heard from a filmmaker who says I want to make it, and I have $50 million to make it, but I want to direct it, I would gladly defer if I liked the filmmaker, if I respected the filmmaker.
Mhm.
I don't have to direct The Last Full Measure. I'll sign on as an executive producer and give it my blessing. And I would never stand in the way of getting The Last Full Measure made because it's a terrific book.
It is good, yeah.
I mean, I thought Jeff did a great job with the novel, even though Gods in General, even though I had to change it for the screenplay,
Yeah.
was not a reflection on the novel he wrote. I thought he did a great job in the novel, and he did an even better job with The Last Full Measure. And as we know, he's turned out to be a formidable writer. So no, I would welcome the third part of the trilogy being made, even if I'm not the filmmaker who makes it.
Well, I hope you are because we won't get those great scenes that, that you created for both the other two movies, And like you said, you've still got loads of spring in your step. So, you know, wink, wink. I'm only joking, but again, it's a fantastic book. It really is, and it heavily focuses a lot on Chamberlain again, doesn't it? And his story, and he has a real hell of a journey, doesn't he, in this book? Because he gets malaria, he gets wounded at Petersburg, and yeah. But fingers crossed.
Well, it would be nice to see because it goes to the end of the war. It
Yeah,
goes through the Appomattox. You have that moving climactic scene where the Confederate soldiers have to lay down their arms and they're saluted. They're
yeah.
saluted by the
See, look,
victorious.
you're even imagining it already, the scene that you're going to shoot there.
Oh, it's it would be nice. Look, you never can tell when it's made. It could be made after I'm gone.
Yeah,
Jeff and I have
I
the
know.
film
Yeah,
rights, so whoever inherits the film rights on my side, you never say never. Because
no.
it is, I agree with you. It's a terrific book, and it would complete the trilogy. Because as we know, my film Copperhead, sometimes it's talked about as a Civil War trilogy, but Copperhead is not a part of the
Hmm.
trilogy. Copperhead is a standalone movie
Hmm.
about what went on in Upper New York State with great performances by Billy Campbell, who is
Yeah,
also in and he plays Pitzer in Gettysburg, and he plays Pickett in Gods and Generals, and he plays the leading role of Abner Beach in Copperhead. I mustn't forget for your viewers that I now have a YouTube channel too, and so if you go to YouTube at Patu Maxwell, and that's
mhm.
Patou Maxwell. YouTube at Patu Maxwell, and you'll see my new YouTube channel.
Yeah. Well, what I will do, Ron, is I will put a link in the podcast description so everyone can go and please go and And Ron, you're really good on Facebook as well. You respond to, you put up some great posts. You respond to people's comments and stuff. So guys, go and check out Ron's thing. And just going back to what you're saying about Appomattox, I recently went there about a year ago, and I mean the actual village of Appomattox is just how it was. Although you'd have to deal with the park service again, you wouldn't have to look far for a location for that great scene of that surrender. But anyway, Ron, it's been an absolute pleasure, my friend. And once again, I just want to thank you for persevering and making that movie in 90s. And again, what's really strange is obviously I saw the movie Gettysburg in 2004 and then watched Gods and Generals after. I didn't know about Gods and Generals until afterwards. But again, it's shaped my life and shaped my directory in life and the direction I've gone. So all I can say is thank you.
Well, thank you, Darren, and thank you for your knowledge because you obviously know both these movies inside out. You know reenacting very well, and you know your Civil War history. So your questions have elicited responses that I quite frankly haven't done in any other interviews. So thank you for getting that out of me.
Well, I appreciate that. And if you ever come to the UK, my friend, give me a shout because you'll get a very good tour. And yeah, free of charge as well. And all that is left to say is cheers.
Cheerio.